started coon hunting with hounds about 25 years ago. I used to hunt in a lot of places I had never been to during the daylight. I used to hunt by myself, but sometimes I would ride four-wheelers with a couple of old men who couldn't get around too good anymore. Occasionally I would have to leave them and walk to the dogs if we couldn't get the four-wheelers to the tree. On this particular night, the dogs treed in an area we didn't usually wind up in. We don't have vast tracts of wilderness down here, but this place is about 2 miles from any road, though the railroad tracks do run through it. At the time this happened, logging had just started, so most of this area was still covered in big hardwood timber. It's all gone now. Me and the old boys went to get the dogs, and in the process, I got us turned around. It was summertime, and most of the sloughs were almost dry. They were just heavy and thick mud. I found one that was heading in the directions that I wanted to go, so I took it. Almost immediately, I noticed a set of large barefoot tracks that had been made not too long ago, sunk deep into the ground. I can't say 100% for sure that Bigfoot made them, but who would be walking barefoot in a cottonmouth-infested river bottom? After a little while, I knew where I was, and I stayed in the old slough bed. We followed the tracks right up to the gas line that ran through the bottoms, which is about 75 yards wide. The tracks didn't lead into the gas line, which told me that whatever had made them had left the slough bed and stayed in the woods. When we made it back to the truck, I asked one of the old boys what he thought of the tracks. He said it was just some dopehead wandering around. I said the hell it was. They replied, "Now don't you go start booger hunting on me." Well, I never mentioned it again. I still hunt and trap in that area, and I haven't seen anything else. But I've been hunting a few times when what I'll describe as a feeling of dread would come over me. Both times I hightailed it out of there and I left, so I don't know if it was my imagination or what. I have some friends who used to hunt some hardwood over by the river. One day, one of them asked me if I'd ever heard crows call after dark. I said I hadn't ever heard that. He said every time they turned their dogs loose, when they would strike and start working a track, the crows would start cawing back and forth. Pitch black dark. Here in Arkansas, timber is a big deal. I can tell you lots of coon hunters have had encounters, but none of them would ever admit to it. I've known guys who refuse to go coon hunting alone. They'll never say why, but I have a good idea why they don't go. This is a haunted house story, and it's pretty good. My mother's family has had a farm for over 200 years. In the original will, it states that the property can be added to, but it cannot be sold. It has passed from family member to family member and can only go to those in my mother's bloodline. The house was built in 1860. It's a brick structure and it has 3 stories. Through the front door is a large entryway and an oak stairway, and past that is a long hall with rooms on each side and a kitchen at the end. The second floor is full of bedrooms, and the third floor used to be an old ballroom. Every room has a fireplace, though over the years, as electricity and furnaces and plumbing were installed, they've been blocked off with decorative iron plates. There's a wraparound porch and a large summer kitchen on the back of the house. 6 spirits still call this beautiful historical house home, and with the exception of 2 of them, they are all relatives. Of the 2 that are not, one was a wagon accident survivor and brought to the house where he died, and the other was a visitor who had suddenly dropped dead from what was suspected to be a heart attack. One of the spirits in this house is my maternal grandfather, and although Grandpa chewed tobacco, he did not like smoking. He especially disliked it when women smoked. He was old-fashioned that way. My mother, who used to smoke, even as an adult, would never smoke in front of him and never did until the day he died in this house. After he passed away, she decided to keep the place rather than pass it along to another relative. Since she and my dad did not have any sons, it was mostly me and my mother, my dad, and a couple of hired hands who worked it and kept it in shape. My sisters were not interested in staying at the house and could not wait until they could leave and move to town. 2005, my dad passed away. My oldest sister decided to take Mom to her house for a few days, and my two younger sisters were off staying with friends, so that left me alone. Now, I've never been afraid to stay there by myself, even to this day, but I decided to call some friends to come and maybe play cards and watch movies with me that night. 4 of us were sitting around the kitchen table, and at that time we all smoked. We were playing cards, talking, and smoking when suddenly the cigarette was slapped out of my hand by something unseen. Not a second later, across the table, my friend's cigarette went flying from her hand too, and an ashtray flew off the table. My friends were completely stunned, and the look on their faces was one of horror. I jumped up, picked up the cigarettes, and I put them in the sink, while my friend screamed and ran out the door. My friend, who had her cigarette slapped away, had a red mark on her cheek. She said that she felt the hand slap her. She was in hysterics. I got her to calm down and told her that we could play cards in the summer kitchen, but they wanted nothing to do with that, and they got in their cars and left. I walked back into the house and said loudly, "Thanks a lot, Grandpa." I swear I heard him laughing, and to this day, no one has smoked in this house since, and when those same friends stop by, it's only during the daytime, and they refuse to come inside. My wife and I started spending the weekends with her father after her mother passed away. My wife had told me in the past that she had experiences with Bigfoot on her parents' property, but I told her that she was full of it. But the more time we spent there, the more I started talking to the locals, and it was apparently common knowledge that a family of Bigfoot was living in the woods, and it was a hush-hush subject. At night, I sit outside on the back porch and listen to the sounds of the woods. Between the frogs and the toads and crickets and other wildlife, it's pretty noisy. I notice that every night around 9:30, I hear what sounds like a drum roll on the trees, followed by a series of tree knockings that comes in threes. As soon as the knocking comes, the wildlife goes quiet. It's too quiet. I've heard howling and screaming, and one night, right on the other side of the tree line, I heard a whooping sound and multiple other strange vocalizations. I became curious about this because I always listened to your stories. I wanted to see a Bigfoot. So one weekend, my friend Richie and I decided to go camping and see what we could find. And as soon as we got into the woods, we noticed tree breaks, wooden structures, which excited us. We set up our camp and decided to explore. We followed the directions that the tree breaks pointed to, and it led us deep into the woods, farther than I had ever been. Eventually, we came across a fallen tree with a bundle of jagged stems that were about 2 foot long. They were all equal in length, and they were lying neatly, pointing to the left. There were no people out there, so who would put the stems there? We went in the direction they pointed, and we ended up in a ravine with a stream running through it. The next sign we found was a big X. Now, I don't know what this means, but that's where we found the tracks. They were almost human, measuring 13 inches. And as soon as we found the tracks, we started hearing crunching in the earth and the branches breaking. We didn't see what was making the sound, but it sounded big. We picked up our pace, chopping through the thick vegetation with our machetes, and eventually we found our camp, and everything was good, but we felt like we were being watched. 40 yards away, we noticed something crouched down in the bushes, and it was watching us, and we pretended not to notice it. Nighttime came, and we heard walking in the woods around the perimeter of our camp from 4 different positions, and then we heard a loud whoop followed by a tree knock. It was too close for comfort. I turned on my night vision binoculars and I scanned the area, and I noticed something was peeking around a tree at me. It would look and hide, and then look and hide. This went on for an hour, and then it was gone. All night we heard bipedal footsteps all around our camp. As you can guess, we didn't sleep that night. And when the sun came up, everything was normal again, and we got even more curious. We went to the tree where the thing had been watching us and found footprints just like the ones we saw the day before. There was a little hole where it looked like it was digging for some reason, but we didn't know why. We jumped into our hammocks when it got dark and we waited. And once again, footsteps were all around our camp. And then I heard a rabbit scream. I thought maybe an owl had gotten it, so I shrugged it off. And then around 3:30 a.m., I heard footsteps in the camp. And then I heard the sound of someone urinating. It was the longest pee I'd ever heard. "Richie, is that you?" I whispered. There was no reply. So I asked a little louder, and I heard him move into his sleeping bag. He was silent and frozen in fear. I turned my night vision on to see what scared him, and I couldn't believe my eyes. There were 5 of them right there in our camp, less than 20 feet away from us. A female was lying on the ground, eating the giant millipedes that infested the woods there. And the smaller one was crouched down next to her, and on the hill were 3 big males, one of whom was holding a rabbit by its head. One of the males saw me looking at them and made a come-on motion with his arm as if he was rushing the female to leave. I turned around in my hammock, and I hoped that they would not kill us. They hung around the camp until sun came up. I stayed in fear all night. Richie crapped on himself. Oh, gosh. I'm going to go back again and offer them some food to see if they're peaceful or not. I know I'm taking a chance in doing this, but I'm a thrill seeker. I served 6 years in the 7th Special Forces and 3.5 years in Afghanistan. I've never felt the sensation I felt in those woods, not even in a firefight. I have to go back. Oh man, I think it's a pretty good conclusion that they're not aggressive or violent. They were right there beside you and they didn't do anything to you. I hear you. If you want to go back, go back. If you're a thrill seeker and an adrenaline junkie, and if that was more excitement than an actual firefight or combat, dude, you have a high threshold for excitement. But I thought this was a great story, and I know it may sound strange, but there are, there's only about 20% of the stories I get where people actually see them, have an encounter, a visual encounter. It's like they're within eyesight and they can see. So it's very interesting. It's a unique story, and I appreciate the writer for sending it. This story was told to me in a smoky little bar in Nashville, Tennessee by an old man. His name was Samuel, and he appreciated the beer that I bought him. I could tell by his old worn hat and tattered flannel shirt, scuffed up shoes, that he was barely getting by. I left him sitting at the bar and found a table in the back. I was hungry and I wanted to get something to eat, maybe a burger since there weren't a lot of choices in that type of place. The waitress soon came over to take my order. She was a portly but pleasant woman with a great smile. Before I ordered, I asked her what the story was on the old gent sitting at the bar. She told me that Samuel was a once-a-month regular, coming in a few days after he had gotten a Social Security check and had paid his bills. She explained that he lived in a rooming house up the road a piece and didn't have a pot to piss in. When Samuel came in each month, he would only order 1 beer and snack on the free peanuts if they were out on the bar. I ordered some burgers and fries and another beer. And as she was turning to walk away, I asked her to get Samuel whatever he wanted to eat and another beer. She smiled and then turned and went to the bar, where she talked softly to the old man. And after she left to go to the kitchen, Samuel got off his stool and walked back to my table to thank me again. I told him it was no problem, and I asked him to join me. He nodded and smiled. I noticed that he had a sparkle in his eyes, unlike most his age. My guess was that he was as hungry as I was because we both sat eating in silence. Afterward, we sipped on our beers, and I told him that my name was Jim and that I was from Louisville. I had just returned from Florida after working 6 months on hurricane-damaged houses. Samuel told me that he was born and raised in the hills of North Carolina until he was 21. He said that he would love those mountains until his last breath. The most beautiful, wild place on earth, he said. I had to ask him if he loved it so much, why he left. Off to war, maybe no work there? His posture changed. He bowed his head slightly and slowly shook it. No. I saw his new demeanor, and I knew I should have left the subject alone, but I didn't. I asked him why. Samuel laid his hands down on the table to stop them from shaking as he began to speak. He said he had not told anyone the reason he left, but since he was old now and I had been kind to him, he would share a story with me. His words came softly and well thought out. I could tell that there was something that weighed deeply on his mind, if not also in his heart. His family had a farm at the bottom of the hollow about 10 miles out of Greenville. There were 3 kids. They were all boys who worked alongside Mom and Pop in the fields and gardens and with the livestock. They never had a lot, but they didn't know it. They hardly ever missed church or twice-a-month visit to their grandparents several ridges over. They hunted and fished and trapped to help put food on the table. Jobs were scarce back then, so when a neighbor boy from 2 hollows over told Samuel that an out-of-town logging company was hiring, he was all for it. So he told his family of his plans, and he promised to send money if they hired him. He was hired on and jumped onto the old flatbed truck with a couple of other fellas. He was no experienced logger, but he was good with firearms. One day the foreman was target practicing with his 12-gauge double barrel. He had Samuel toss short sticks in the air as far as he could, and then he tried to blow them apart. The foreman caught Samuel with his head turned slightly, snickering, and raised his voice and asked him if he thought he could do better. The foreman reloaded, handed Samuel the gun. After 5 blown-apart sticks, he had had enough of Samuel not missing. He told him to be at his office in the morning, that he had another job waiting for him because he was definitely not a logger. It turned out that the new job was as deputy for the company, essentially providing armed security when needed. Samuel was happy with the new position, but he was also gullible. He found himself, along with other armed deputies, assisting the bosses with the removal of folks from the mountains who refused to move, even though the company held the deeds to their land. Word had a way of soaring through the ridges and hollows like a swift-winged sparrow, and people quit talking to Samuel. His own family asked him to not return to the farm. If he saw someone he knew, they would cross to the other side of the road. It was shunning, mountain style. Way up in the mountains, in a very secluded hollow, about 5 miles from his parents, lived the Praters. The clan was run by an elderly woman known as Mammy Prater. There were no roads to their cabin, only mule trails. People guessed that there were 14 or more of them living in that one big cabin. They hardly came down off the mountain except to get things that they could not make or hunt, things like cloth and salt and snuff for old Mammy. The Praters had owned those 1,800 acres since before the Civil War. It was uncut forest with trees so tall, some 6 or 7 feet through the trunks. It was the boss's 3rd attempt to evict them. The last 2 attempts ended with deputies taking fire from all directions. But that day, the boss came with a big crew. They had an ace in the hole. Riding in front on the mule with the deputy was a 6-year-old girl in a plain flower sack dress. Jenny Prater had been kidnapped from the aunt that she was staying with for a few days, right out of the front yard. Jenny was Mammy's great-grandchild. This bothered Samuel, using a child as leverage, but the company was all that he had then, and speaking up about it could cost him his job. He and his team rode their mules right up to the front porch of the cabin. The whole family was either sitting on the steps and wooden barrels or stumps. Samuel counted 12 people that he could see, not including Mammy, who sat in a big homemade rocking chair on the front porch. The boss pulled up some papers and waved them in front of the old lady. He told her this was company land now and that they had to leave. He reached over and rubbed little Jenny's head. She began to cry. Piercing anger shot from the old lady's eyes. She told the boss that they would leave, but he had to let them pray together once more. He told her to have at it, but don't be all damn day, he said. Before they prayed, he had the deputies collect the Praters' guns and put them in a pile. The odd thing was there was no resistance. Some were even smiling. Some of them helped Mammy off the porch, and all of them stood in a half circle. In unison, they tilted their heads back, and the most god-awful strange cry came out of their mouths. It was a high-pitched noise made using their tongues, almost a fast-paced chant, and as quickly as it started, it ended. They all sat down, each of them smiling. Out of nowhere, a pumpkin-sized boulder flew into the boss's mule, and then another crashed through the treetops and hit the officer on the far right. Samuel couldn't shoot, couldn't see anything in the dark forest. A mule brayed as two large hairy arms twisted its head and broke its neck. Shots rang out from the bosses and deputies, but to no effect. Huge hairy beasts were everywhere, ripping apart men and mules. Samuel turned to look at his boss and watched as a hairy ape beast wrapped its huge hands around his neck, squeezing. His head fell to the ground and Samuel vomited onto the bloody earth. Samuel's turn came. He saw a beast reaching for him. It stopped in its tracks and it growled. And then there were clicking noises. It was coming from old Mammy. The yard was soaked with blood. Everyone was dead, man and mule. The family had moved to the porch, and Samuel counted 11 creatures as they started carrying or dragging body parts back into the deep woods. Mammy Prater stood up and told Samuel that he was a token. They always had to leave a token. He was to leave that country and never return or speak of what had happened. Samuel had tears in his eyes by the time he finished his story. I sat there for a time, silent and nodding. I wasn't sure what to say, but I didn't dare be respectful toward him. After a while, I thanked him for his company, and I stood up and shook his hand and left him $50. I couldn't drive fast enough to get back home to Louisville. I'm not sure if I believed his story or not, but that night, and for many nights after, I had nightmares about it. All right, I'm going to drop a couple of older stories from 5 or 6 years ago that appeared on this podcast. Some of you may have heard them, some of them maybe not. If not, I hope you enjoy them. I'm glad you all joined me on this podcast. I really appreciate you. And after these last 2 archives, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. While I was in elementary school in 1971, I saw The Legend of Boggy Creek, and I later read Peter Burns' little paperback book on Bigfoot. The North Georgia mountains, especially the Appalachians, are rich with legends and strange stories about boogers. Parents and adults would say, "Don't go out at night, that's where the booger bears come out," or "Don't go there, the boogers will get you." The problem was that nobody would ever tell you what a booger was or how it looked, so we thought it was only a scary story. In the spring of 1973, a game warden went missing overnight and was found on a rural road walking the next morning by a passing car. He was exhausted and confused with his clothes torn, and he couldn't remember what had happened. It was later said that he claimed to have seen a tall, hairy creature with a big head and a face like a bull. This story was buzzing around for about 2 weeks, and suddenly all talk of it went quiet. We think he either quit or the state relocated him. In March of 1974, I was 15 years old. I didn't drink or smoke or anything like that. I was a straight arrow football player and not the type to tell stories. About 8:30 p.m. I was riding in a car with 3 other guys, and the driver was about 2 years older than us. We were spotlighting deer, illegally, but not for the purpose of shooting one. We were just checking them out. We were going down the main road, and it was barely paved, and it was full of potholes. As we rolled along about 10 to 15 miles an hour, we spotted a buck and 2 does up on a chest-high red clay bank with bushes and overgrowth partially blocking our view. This was at a 4-way crossroads where the very narrow dirt right-hand road led off into a completely deserted forest with no houses. On the left was another dirt gravel road with an old church on the corner. Further down that road were a couple of farms. A river runs down one side that is fed by the Amicalola Falls, which is located at the head of the Appalachian Trail. Ironically, there is an area of the river known as the Devil's Elbow where moonshiners, car thieves, pot growers, and hunters were alleged to have gone missing over the years. This is the same area where the game warden went missing in 1973. I was a passenger in the rear seat and I couldn't really see the deer. We stopped and the guy in front of me got out with a spotlight. It was an old D-cell and he shined the deer. Apparently the deer had been running and were tired because they didn't haul butt when we lit them up. About 3 or 4 seconds after exiting the back seat, I heard a crack or a pop 45 degrees to my right in the forest. My friend who was sitting next to me heard it and said, "Oh man, I bet that's the game warden." I said, "That's one noisy game warden." He then began urging the driver to get us out of there. About that time came some more noises, like something large moving through the woods. I instantly thought it was a bear because a 500-pounder was killed in our area, but bears are known to be very quiet when walking. So I started saying, "Let's go," and the hairs started standing up on my arms and neck, and I began to feel sick with fear. About that time, about 75 or 80 feet to my right, at a 15 to 20 degree angle, I watched a huge, hulking figure cross that road from bank to bank in 3 forward-leaning large steps while swinging its arms. From the sound it was making, it appeared to be approaching the deer, and at the moment, they bolted out of there. Now let's pause for a moment as I'm frozen with fear and it seems like time has slowed down. My friend to the left says, "What the hell was that?" And now we're both saying, let's go, and have one foot in the car. And then as I look up on the top of the embankment, I see the outline of a figure move slowly to get behind a tree where its face was obscured. My friend with a spotlight starts slowly getting in the car while me and the other dude dive in the back seat. At this time, my older and more stubborn friend pulls out a .22 pistol and says, "Who are you? Talk to me or I'm going to shoot." Now we're screaming, "Let's go," as he again says, "Tell me who you are or I'm going to shoot." I think my friend in front of me still has the light pointed at it over the door, even though he is now back in the car. At that instant, we hear a bang, bang, as the driver shoots up in the air. He immediately throws the pistol down and jumps in the car as we spin out of there sideways. Now I'm shaking all over so bad that my feet are actually tapping and everybody but the driver is talking at once. I don't remember who asked first. I think the guy in front, but he said, "What did you see?" The driver is silent as we drove until we found a closed gas station and we pulled over. He got out and went to the drink machine and downed a Coke, but he still wouldn't talk. Now my friend is driving us all home and it's about 10 p.m. and we're planning to go back the next day to look around in the daylight. We also agreed to tell our families minus the part about the gunfire, of course. After we drop off my friend in the back, we're headed to my house. My friend in front says to the driver, "Hey man, what did you see?" Nothing but silence until we got to my house where my friend in the front says, "You saw its face, didn't you?" He very quietly said, I sat there for a minute waiting for more, but it was obvious he wasn't talking and it was getting late on that school night. I then had to get out and walk up the long path to the dark backside of the house, which sat at the foot of the mountain. When I got inside, my mom noticed that there was something wrong, and her first question was, "Has somebody been drinking?" Now that was all I needed, so as I finally managed to tell my story, my mom replied, "It's probably the devil." But my dad, who grew up on a farm only a few miles from this incident, sat silent, looking at the TV. It was his older generation on both sides of the family who used the term booger. Growing up on a farm, he knew all too well about booger stories and later said that he used to hear the strange screaming sounds in the woods. They always blamed it on the panthers, but they were all hunted and killed by the 1900s. The few other people that I shared this story with laughed and ridiculed me, so I shut my mouth until 1980. The following day, we all headed back, and our driver still wasn't going to talk. We got to the location and we couldn't find footprints, but we did find broken branches and impressions in the ground. Then we got to the tree where its face was hidden. A prominent crooked limb stuck out and bent upward. I could stand flat-footed and reach the limb with my arm almost extended, and that put the creature at about 7 foot 10 inches or possibly more. We went back 2 times at night to look, stupid and heavily armed, but found nothing, thank God. About 2 months later, I was in church and I saw a girl that lived on that same road but closer to the main highway. I told her what had happened and a very serious expression overtook her face. She informed me that it had run across the road in front of her one night while coming home from a football game. She also said that her uncle saw it coming out of his chicken house about a year ago. I sat there silently thinking, "Oh God, why have you allowed such things to exist?" In 1980, a new subdivision was being built near our encounter. A story started circulating that the first resident of this subdivision came home one night to find his back door broken down and his kitchen ransacked. Nothing was stolen, everything was just destroyed. I didn't know the man, but of all things he was related to my friend who drove the night of our encounter. Before church one morning, I again asked some 6 years later if he had seen its face that night, and he nodded yes, and then he looked away. My opinion is that the sight of it really scrambled his eggs and he didn't want to deal with it. As far as I know, nothing ever came of the vandalized house incident, as that story died quickly, just like the game warden story. For some reason, I told my dad a story that a very peculiar aunt told me at the age of 5 or 6. She and my uncle lived in a house on top of a big hill at the foot of a mountain about 7 miles from this incident. She claimed that while rocking on her front porch one night, a large, hairy man with a very ugly face came around the corner and stood motionless looking at her about 8 feet away. She said that she felt paralyzed with fear and could only cut her eyes to look at it. She was unable to call out to my uncle sitting in the living room behind only a foot away. She claimed that she closed her eyes very tight and began praying, and in a few seconds she opened her eyes and the creature was gone. I remember her saying his face looked like it was hit by a hammer. I asked my dad if she was crazy, to which he replied, "Folks thought so." Well, being able to share this is therapeutic. Thankfully, we now have a Bigfoot museum about an hour north of me. I correspond regularly with the owner and the staff, and they say every week at least one person comes in to share a story. I was honored to have met both Scott Carpenter and David Pilatus there. I hope my story wasn't too boring. I just wonder how many people from my area have even better stories to tell, but they fear the ridicule. It was a weekend of my wife's Baby Steps 5K Memorial Run at Tannehill State Park in Alabama. She and a couple of our friends founded the run to raise money for the Amelia Center Division of Children's Hospital of Birmingham. The Amelia Center helps grieving parents who have lost children cope with the loss and learn how to go on with their lives. Abby and I unfortunately know firsthand how consuming and unforgettable such a loss can be. We lost our twin boys, Brady and Brody, to preterm labor at 5 months. They weren't able to survive the delivery. This is hard to type and even think about, even 13 years later. But God has blessed us with 3 handsome and fun-loving boys. Bryant is 8 years old. We call him Bub Bub. Barrett, who we call Bear Bear, is 3, and our 2-year-old, whose real name is Brandon, we call Bobby. In addition to our sons, my nephew Nick, or Nick, has lived with us as our own son all of his life. I know what you're thinking. Why, Bobby? Well, we thought it was because Bear Bear, who was 1 when Bobby was born, was trying to say baby, when we realized he could say baby just fine. So we figured we just wanted his brother to be called Bobby, and we went with it. We always stay in an old-time cabin at Tannehill for 3 or 4 days of the week of the 5K run, and this year was no different. We love being in nature, and we especially love hiking. So naturally, after the run was over and Abby and the little ones were taking a nap, Nick, Bryant, and I grabbed our walking sticks and we hit the trails. We had previously asked the rangers and the other park employees which trail would be the longest and least occupied. We'd been coming here the same month every year for the past 11 years, so we'd already been down roughly 90% of the hiking trails. Everyone suggested the same trails we'd already walked except for the maintenance man. He said we should follow the creek that runs through most of the park, but to be careful because it connected to privately owned land that is nothing but acres and acres of woods. The no trespassing signs have all fallen over the years, but if we stayed with the creek, we would be okay. We followed the maintenance man's instructions and had been walking the creek bank for a little over 2 hours, stopping to examine every bug, rock, and stick the boys found interesting when we came to a fork in the trail. We stayed true to our course, but the creek trail soon ended. We weren't willing to call it a day yet, so we headed back to the fork and took the other trail to see where it went. It led us uphill away from the water, and we hiked another 45 minutes when it brought us back down to what must have been the wildest, deepest section of the creek. It was a peaceful, serene southern landscape that made me want to sit down on the bank and watch the clouds as the setting sun turned the sky to evening hues. We were relaxing while I was letting Bryant beat me at tic-tac-toe, because I'm a dad and that's what dads do, when Nick pointed out the fact that everything had gone silent. There were no bugs chirping or birds singing at all. Even the wind had gone silent, secretly reveling in Bryant's glee at each momentary lack of reason that would lead another victory for him. I glanced over at Nick and realized he was sitting there frozen in a shivering, frightened state. I jumped up and went over to him with Bryant holding on to my belt loop. As we approached, we all saw movement in the thick brush on the opposite side of the creek. And then it happened. To our surprise, a massive rock the size of 2 truck tires stacked together came flying out of that brush at an impossibly high arc and then splashed down in the creek, sending water up in the air like a geyser with ripples in every direction. I was stunned for a minute or so, but I managed to come around. And then I grabbed Bryant and literally had to shake Nick back to reality. "Nick, you take the lead," I said, laying out our exit strategy. "Bryant, stay in the middle and hold Nick's walking stick in one hand and mine in the other. I'll follow in the rear. That'll keep us joined together and still give us room for fast walking." I had barely finished my instructions when a rain of small rocks came flying across the creek, some hitting the water, but most hitting the bank at our feet. We didn't wait another minute. We took off heading towards the main trail and back to our cabin. Once we made it out of the woods and safely back to our cabin, we sat on the porch and pondered what had happened. Nick could not talk about what he saw that had frightened him into a near catatonic state. Bryant only saw the rocks being thrown. I don't know what to think, but I can assure you I didn't see a catapult set up across the creek, nor any other mechanism that could throw a 200-pound rock that high and that far. It made me think, though, about how far it could throw me. I am 175 pounds, so I know I could be thrown as far as the rock. And Bryant is only about 65 pounds. He'd land a mile away. It was eerie and weird, and I replay it in my mind frequently. The scariest thing to me was the lack of sound from the woods. What would make birds, squirrels, deer, frogs, and even the breeze stop? I'd love to hear your thoughts and the thoughts of your other listeners. I still have trouble coming to a conclusion about the events of that day. It's like I know what it was, but my mind won't accept it. Oh, and by the way, on our way out, we realized we'd strayed 30 minutes outside of the park's borders into the neighboring woods. I've had 3 encounters with Bigfoot in my life. One at the age of 5, the second at the age of 8, and then another at 32. I am currently 42 years old. 2 of these encounters are face-to-face encounters, and one of them was an incredibly eerie experience that, looking back, was a sound encounter. I went away to college on the East Coast, and I live there still. My encounter pushed me to take anthropology as one of my majors to try to figure out what I saw as a kid. My other major was history, and I told people that anthropology was to answer the why question in history. It is not true. Did it help? Sure, but it was not the full reason. I am now a reference librarian at a public library. When people come to me with what would be thought of as a crazy research question, I'm the last person to question them. The first 17 years of my life, I grew up in southern Humboldt County, California, in the town of Rio Dell, and when I was a bit older, we lived in Scotia. These 2 towns reside side by side along the Eel River and were sustained by the logging industry. The way she spells this river is E-E-L. Eel? I don't know. To live in the town of Scotia, you had to work for the lumber company. Work whistles told you when to wake up and go to lunch or when it was time to go home. And as a kid, you knew it was time to head home when the 4:30 p.m. whistle went off because the dads were headed home for dinner and would usually be ready soon after. I am the oldest of 4 kids. My mother was deaf, and we used the American Sign Language as our form of communication in the home. We didn't have much money growing up, so when we did go on vacation, it was to go camping with my mother's parents on a bit of land about an hour and a half from Rio Dell. The town is called Eddersburg and is next to the King Range Mountains. The year was 1981, and my grandparents, my mother and my father, and my sister, who was 2 at the time, I was age 5, and we would all pile into a 1964 white station wagon and head out there for a week to enjoy the small creeks and the sounds of the wilderness. My grandpa had friends who were kind enough to let us camp on that piece of land from the 1950s through the early 1990s. Just as a side note, we stopped in the early 90s because of the illegal marijuana grows by the Mexican cartels in the area, and that made camping too dangerous. My family would set up in the same place every year. My sister and I would play in the forest the entire time in the area. The forest wind was comforting. The rain made me want to just fall asleep. The sounds of the animals were soothing. I never saw any black bears in the area. We did see a small cougar once, and it hurt us kids and it ran away. The area had a small creek that my grandparents enjoyed fly fishing in. There was a huge cast iron dark blue-colored 1890s range that my parents would put the camp stove onto to do the cooking. And finally, a large 1960s Army surplus tent that would fit all 6 of us with army cots. The front flaps would be tied back and the netting would be zip closed to keep the flies and the gnats out. The first thing my sister and I wanted to do was go swimming. We were not very good swimmers at the time, so we would just drag ourselves along the bottom of the creek with our hands while we floated on the surface. We were never a loud family because we signed to each other. If we were, I don't remember us being so. The only noise coming from the camp was us 2 kids. We also had a habit of banging rocks together to see if we could find different ocean snails in them. The area was heavy with fossils and the river rocks. We had a lot of fun trying to see what type we could find. After quite a few nights at the camping spot, it was time to go to bed. It had gotten dark and the night sounds had already started to fill the air. My parents made sure the fire was just embers, and we all went into the tent to lie down to sleep. We all enjoyed a breeze coming into the tent, so we kept the screen zipped but the flaps open. And I also remember the back flap open that was a type of roll-down window that tied at the bottom, but would still have zipped netting to keep the bugs out. I fell asleep quickly, and I slept for a long time. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I could see a dark brown furry creature squatted next to the embers. I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing everyone in their cots. My sister was next to me asleep, and so was the rest of my family. I looked back outside and I could see this creature playing with a stick and drawing in the embers. I saw really dark eyes and hands like mine, and I remember thinking that this creature was really furry, except for a bit on its upper chest near its neck and its face and its palms. It was so absorbed in playing in the embers of the fire that it didn't see me watching it. The creature was intent on playing and would try to catch the end of the marshmallow sticks on fire. The creature was smaller in size, about the size of my father, so it was about 6 feet tall. Looking back, I think it was a teenager or even a juvenile. Its chest was flat, so it wasn't a female, and I remember thinking it was odd to see something out there and just closed my eyes, and I went back to sleep. The next morning I got up and my parents were signing back and forth to each other about large footprints that were in the dirt around the campfire. My father saw us kids coming out of the tent and he walked over to the footprints and he kicked dirt over them. I didn't say anything to my parents at the time because I thought they would think I was just imagining things. Years later, I asked if anyone saw anything, and no one said they did. My second encounter that stuck with me happened in Pepperwood, California. I was 8 years old. My sister would have been 5 years old. It is a plot of land right at the beginning of the Avenue of the Giants when the trees open up to farmland. My family would go to a friend's farm and help them plant, weed, and harvest on the weekends. It was a way to help my parents keep some extra food on the table, but also to let us kids play outside. To this day, there's nothing to me that is as fun as a game of hide and seek or tag in a fully grown cornfield at night. This farm had an upper and lower field. The upper field had mostly corn, and the lower field was things like squash and tomatoes. This lower field backed onto the Eel River and had a band of woods before hitting the river bar. In between the two fields was a strip of dense redwoods, and it was long enough to run the length of the fields, but wide enough that you couldn't see straight through to the lower field. There was a small shaded dirt area that they would park the tractors and disc harrows and the wagons. On one of these summer days, my sister and I were making a log cabin out of sticks. It was late afternoon and my parents were in the lower field planting squash seeds. We were playing in the turnaround area and built it high enough that we could squat in it and were able to put a bunch of more sticks to make a roof. We were singing a bunch of songs that we had just learned in Bluebirds, part of the Campfire Girls, and we were having a fun time. My little sister got tired and said that she was going down next to Pa and Ma and lie down on the softly tilled dirt. We both liked the softly tilled dirt, especially when it had been warmed by the sun all day. I said I was going to play by myself for a little while longer. Well, I was there humming to myself for about 10 minutes or so, and I was piling dirt up on the clay cabin when I noticed that the woods went absolutely quiet. There was no wind, no bird sounds, not even the sound of flies or gnats buzzing. I looked around and I saw that the woods were starting to get dark. The redwoods get dark and cold quickly because of the amount of tree canopy, but this seemed darker than usual. I started to look through the cracks of the cabin to see if I could see anything, and I spun slowly on my knees and looked 360 degrees around me. I didn't see anything, but I could feel someone or something watching me, and my body instantly went cold. I remember thinking, "Don't run." I was afraid of whatever was watching me would chase me, so I crawled out of the cabin, and instead of running, I skipped toward my parents. You are reading an email from a woman who has never skipped in my entire life, but it was the only thing I could think of doing without making whatever was watching me chase after me. I went and sat on the wagon, and I just stared at the ground for a bit, just trying to calm down. This didn't last very long because about 5 minutes after I sat down, I heard a whoop, whoop. The sound started low, and it got high sounding, and it echoed all over the farm area. My father, sister, and I looked around trying to find the sound. Mama saw us looking around and she signed, "What?" Papa got my mama's attention by waving at her and told her that we all heard a sound. My papa looked nervous, and he told us kids it was an owl. I'd never heard owls make sounds like that before, and we heard them all the time. This was so loud that we heard it in our chests. Papa called us kids over to be near to him in the rows and made me start poking the holes to plant the seeds while my sister followed behind and threw a few seeds in. Papa put fish meal on the seeds and covered them. When we finished that row, we left for the day. I don't know what was watching me, but it was an encounter with something that still gives me nightmares. My last encounter was in 2009. Those of you who live in Humboldt County know how hard it is to always have a reliable plane ride from San Francisco to McKinleyville. I was trying to fly north from San Francisco after an early morning flight from Boston because my grandmother had died. The flight was hard enough emotionally, but when the flight north was canceled due to fog, so I had to get a rental car. It was a Ford Taurus. It was the last minute. So now I had a 4-hour ride ahead of me on top of the very early morning flight from Boston. The week in Humboldt was exhausting and heartbreaking, and I then had to get up at 1 a.m. to drive to San Francisco to catch my 6 a.m. flight back to Boston. The beginning of the ride south was fine. There were clear skies and not much fog, except a few in the lower dips next to the rivers. There were no cars going or coming, and I was truly alone on the road until I hit the straightaway just before coming to Laytonville. I could see something big squatting on the right-hand side of the road. First, I had no idea what I was looking at, but as I slowed down to stop next to it, the creature turned its upper body and it looked at me. I got a glimpse of red eye shine as I stopped next to it. My eyes got wide and my mouth fell open. My thought was, oh my God, I'm not really crazy. This is what I saw when I was a kid. My next thought was, don't show teeth. Teeth mean aggression. So I closed my mouth and tried to smile the best I could without showing my teeth, and I waved at the creature. The creature kept looking at me, and then down at the road, and then back at me, and then further down the road, and it did not respond to me when I waved at it. I sat there debating with myself if I should get out of the car to try to speak with it. The anthropologist in me was freaking out, excited. The child that saw the creature felt excited, and all of me wanted to get out of the car and say something to this creature that I had begun to think I had made up in my mind. The creature was dark brown. The windows were up, so there was no smell. The eyes and face reminded me of a human. The eye color was dark black, but then again, it was dark. The nose was flat, the chest was broad like a bodybuilder, but the hair looked fine. The creature was squatting and was still as tall as the car I was driving. Logic kicked in, and I remembered that I needed to make it to the airport on time, and I didn't have the money to be rebooked, so I didn't get out of the car, and I waved goodbye. The creature began to stand up. I began to drive, and I tapped the brakes and looked behind me. The creature was crossing the road, and I could only see as high as the creature's hip in the red brake lights. My guess is the creature was between 7 and 8 feet tall. 30 yards further down the road was a slight right in the highway. Along the side of that dip, there was a cluster of ferns and about 5 deer. That's when it hit me what the Bigfoot was looking at. He was looking at dinner. This is when I felt a chill run down my spine. While I personally don't think Bigfoot are very aggressive in the Pacific Northwest, I'm pretty sure the need to get to the airport saved me from making a terrible mistake. I kept driving until I got to Ukiah and found the first open gas station and told the attendant I needed a bathroom key. I thought better of telling this attendant I had just seen a Bigfoot, and I went and stood in the beat-up, dimly lit bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. On one hand, I was thrilled that I could finally verify to myself what I saw when I was 5 years old. But on the other is when I realized I had been in the city way too long. I had forgotten the very thing that kept me alive all those years growing up in Humboldt County, and that was to always be careful in the woods. Needless to say, my mind was racing for days afterward. I got to the airport on time, and I wanted to tell people, hey, I just saw a Bigfoot. However, I also wanted to get back to Boston, and I'm pretty sure I would have been committed at the time if I'd started telling people what I saw. Oh, that's so funny. As a side note, I don't know why, when I saw the creature, I was never afraid. I've only ever been afraid when an animal makes an aggressive stance toward me, and neither one of these did that.